Welcome to Redefining Autism 2016, an online summit. I'm Kat Lee. I'm an RDI program certified consultant, and joining me today is Lisa Polasti, also an RDI program certified consultant with a wonderful topic. But first, Lisa, why don't you tell us just a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name's Lisa Polasti. I live and work in Ontario, Canada. I work with families, however, all over North America. I see families in person. I work with families online. And I'm going to tell you quite a bit more about my story today with respect to my journey, my family, and why I've chosen this topic to share with you today, what really matters. How to think about your development of a long-term perspective and setting priorities for your child.
Well, it's a wonderful topic. I love the title, What Really Matters. And I should share that I'm also a mother. My son is 23, and he was diagnosed when he was 2 years old with ASD. And so this topic is very dear to my heart, having been on this journey with him for so long, 21 years now. Learning how to develop that long-term perspective, it is so important. And Lisa, I'm so excited that you're sharing this topic with us.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to share a little bit about my family. Well, I'll tell you about what we're going to cover. So I'm going to talk with you about my journey. I'm going to talk with you about why it's important to have a long-term perspective. I'm going to help you start thinking about what abilities are necessary in order to function in the 21st century. I'll talk a little bit about what research now tells us about autism and the universal deficits of autism. And this research is just it has really exploded with our understanding more about neuroscience, but also with respect to autism and then typical development. What we've learned in the last 10 years, and even specifically the last 6 years, is really mind-boggling, really mind-blowing. And then I want to discuss with you how that impedes quality of life for the individual. Okay, so a little bit
Very
more.
exciting.
Thank you, thank you. So a little bit more about me. This is just a picture of my family, and I'm a bit embarrassed to say that this picture is a little bit dated. It's been a couple of years since this photo was taken, but there's my husband with me, and then my oldest son is actually the one right beside me, kind of in the background there, and his name is Anthony, and he is going to be 20 in March, and then Evan is 16 going on 17 soon. And so again, this picture was a couple years ago, and you're going to be able to see the remarkable growth that the kids have had even just since then. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of a background about both of the kids. So Anthony, when he was an infant, we discovered that he had a partial blockage of his urethral valve, and he had a lot of hospitalizations and a lot of medical mishaps. Gosh, that seems like quite a mild word for everything that the poor little guy had to go through. But he had underwent kidney failure. He had to go through invasive testing then to balance his electrolytes every day. He had to be poked with needles. He had a blood infection, sepsis, which he almost died from. He was dehydrated 3 times in the hospital while he was under their care. He had a very, very high drug fever that was not manageable by Tylenol, and his temperature for over a couple of days was 107, and it turned out it was, in fact, the antibiotic that I thought that it was and told 11 doctors and nurses it's the antibiotic that's doing this to my son. Consequently, this all happened in the first few years of his life, and by the time he was 3 years old, we discovered that he had mild intellectual delay. Actually, at that time, they used words that I don't even want to repeat because it was just quite, it was the MR word. It was very hard to hear. And he was also diagnosed with ADHD, which I never agreed with. I said it's anxiety, and the anxiety became much more apparent as he grew older. Well, then after that one, after we kind of went through all of this, I happened to be pregnant about the same time with my youngest, and I was pretty certain that God doesn't give you two the same. Well, I ended up having a second child, and you know what? They're completely opposite children. And this little guy was diagnosed with autism when he was 2.5, but I suspected something fairly early on. He was quite happy to be left for extended periods of time in the exerciser, and he cried a lot as a youngster, and he just had some things that sparked my concern early on. Okay, so when I had realized that my children had these diagnoses, I was listening to the well-intended professionals that we were able to access in our area, and they all really pushed me or made recommendations for me to head in one direction, and we went there. We embarked on a really intensive program, a very popular style of teaching children, not only with autism, but even sometimes children with diagnoses like Anthony. And we did that intensively for a couple of years. But all the while, we started that when he was not quite 3, and then up until about 5 years of age. And all the while, though, I was very fearful for my son's future. And the things that I was the most concerned about after 30 hours of therapy, 35 hours of therapy a week for a couple of years, I was still quite concerned about his future. And the things that I wanted for him, the hopes that I had for him, were to be able to have reciprocal experience sharing, communication with others. He could speak in 8 and 9 word sentences. He had learned all the skills that children of the same age group could do, but he could not have that back and forth reciprocal exchange. He didn't have meaningful friendships. He was not independent. He lacked ability to really share how he was feeling or what he was concerned about. So he really lacked self-advocacy, very poor self-awareness. He was a very spacey child, would disconnect very easily. And if he wasn't disconnecting, he was acting out in sabotage. He would sabotage engagements with people, with myself and others, by acting very silly. Again, a very poor attention maintenance. And the biggest concern that I had was that he wasn't motivated to learn from others. And so he was continually, he needed to be prompted and kind of prodded in order to function in his school environment and in home. And so our hopes for his future were the same, I think, that any parent might have for their child, which would be to be independent and to be able to get a job and have friendships and marriage. And so here's a picture of Evan today. And that was the thing. I remember,
wow.
I know, isn't that cool? This was just like 3 weeks ago. And this is a stark contrast to this guy here in the red sweatshirt, because you can see he's really accomplished a lot of fitness goals over this time. He's lost quite a bit of weight, and I'm quite proud of him. When my kids were young, I think the thing that was the most concerning was that I wanted to know what their future was going to hold, and nobody could tell me what that might be. But I also didn't want to put any kind of limitations on what their future could potentially be, and I wanted to reach for the stars, and I wanted to keep on trying. I didn't want to have any regret. And so I kept searching for the right type of a program that could help me ensure that my children were developing the kind of abilities that they needed to in order to function effectively in the real world. And so today, my son has a growth-seeking mindset, and I say to the max, because this kid is motivated. If anybody had to ask me what the number one thing that I'm most proud of that my children have, I would say it's intrinsic motivation, or we could call it growth-seeking mindset. he's goal seeking. He does set goals for himself, and he's able to monitor them and update his knowledge based on how things are going. He's got a job. He asked for promotion. He was a dishwasher last year. This year, he is managing the fry cook, and he was just telling me just a short while ago that last night the guy that was supposed to work the grill called in sick, and so he had to manage the grill and the fry.
Wow.
Yeah, so he was quite proud of being able to have to multitask. He works hard, but he's not an A student, but he works hard and he does get A's and B's. He advocates for himself. He has been able to just take it upon himself to talk to his teacher. One day he told his teacher that he was having a hard time taking notes and listening at the same time, and I never discussed that with him. He did that on his own accord. He has friends. He thinks about the future. He's organized. He organizes his time in a way that he told me one day he kind of started playing a lot of video games, but we've always kept that in check here in our home. And he said, you know, Mom, I've realized that I don't have a very balanced life when I play too much video games. It's just really a waste of time.
Wow.
Yeah, and he's responsible. He does manage his time. He's empathetic and he's funny. My favorite story about him is one day I was a little bit frazzled, and I like to give him a little bit of downtime when he comes home from school. And I said to him, you know, this particular day, I said, Evan, I said, can you help me out? Can you do the dishes? When he's a fairly large guy, he's 6'1", and he stood up and he walked towards me and he said, I have just one word to say. And he said it to me with complete flat effect. And he said, and it starts with an F. And I was like, and he looked at me, cocked his head, smirked a smile, and said, fine.
I'm glad that's what he said.
Yeah, me too. I burst out laughing. Yeah. And so our hopes for Anthony are the same as they are for Evan, and that is the same exact things that we want for him the long term. And we wanted him to be able to develop those skills, the self-awareness and the self-advocacy. We also, he also, similar to Evan, kind of struggled with some of the same things, but he also had difficulty with emotional regulation, which was primarily a result of the stress, the trauma that he went through as an infant. And then motivation to learn was interesting too, in that he had a hard time with retention. And I believe now that he has the intrinsic motivation has really been developed fully in him. His retention, all of a sudden, is pretty solid. It wasn't before, right? It's more meaningful for him now. He sees the big picture, that long-term perspective. And so what he's been able to accomplish in his life is he has a couple of jobs. Both kids actually volunteer. They teach children, ironically, they teach children with special needs how to ski. He's a new car owner, gold medal winner for swimming. He's athletic. He also has achieved some weight loss and some fitness goals. We love food in this house. He works hard to learn. He's got the retention. He's very charming. Okay, so long-term perspective, this is something that I really want to help families understand. How are you spending your time and your energy now in ways that will help promote the things that you desire for your child's future? And that's really important, because I think so often we can get swayed into just being reactive in our parenting. And so by creating what we could call a vision statement, or people could call it a mission statement, it's not that different from even a business plan when you're thinking about establishing some long-term goals. And so the reasons why it's good to understand why we want to create them. And it helps us to ensure that we stay proactive in our parenting versus reactive. It helps us provide us with inspiration, because we want to keep our eyes on the prize and think about what it is, what's the big goal, you know, because we've got to be able to sustain that motivation ourselves. It helps us to inoculate from others' agendas, and this easily happens when well-intended professionals and school staff and even family and friends sometimes want us to focus on maybe extinguishing a behavior, when if we can really focus on the long term and developing the neural complexity of the prefrontal cortex, that in of itself can help to to take over and diminish a behavior, because the brain isn't operating as much from the lower level cortex. I'm not going to get into too much neuroscience here. That's pretty heavy stuff. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so it helps to spouses be on the same page. It can help you stay motivated when you're feeling discouraged. It helps you appraise when you're getting off track. Sometimes families get off track and they get busy and they forget about what's important. It helps provide you for an anchor for your efforts, and it helps you to make decisions and set priorities. And finally, it can be a really good springboard for discussion, to set goals with schools and professionals and agencies. And I've done that. I've shared my mission statements or vision statements with the schools so that they knew that it wasn't about just getting by day and week by week, that I had some real solid goals for my child. And I think that it helps to form relationships with schools when they can think about it like that. They realize that they're just one part of the cog in the wheel in terms of helping that child to fulfill, their fullest potential. That's going to ultimately take much longer than just the time that they have with them.
I think that, professionals, teachers, administrators will be impressed that parents have vision statements, because a question that is commonly asked the parents that I work with by their teachers, educators, etc., is, well, what do you want for your child? And imagine the amazement where you say, well, actually, I have a vision plan for my child that I would love to share with you. I think that would really be impressive in all the right ways to those professionals around parents.
That's been my experience, both personally and professionally, that when the parent comes to the table with these kinds of vision statements, and they share that with the school wants to get on board. And schools want to help people that want to help themselves. They're really impressed by that parent that says, you know what, this is my kid, and I've got goals and I want to help them, and I'm not just expecting you to fix my kid, but rather let's figure out this together and then kind of work backwards so that we can work in a way that makes sense developmentally. And as opposed to behaviorally, because sometimes if all those efforts are placed in just trying to get the child to behave in a certain way, it doesn't necessarily equate to long-term quality of life or long-term functioning. And I'll get into a little bit more about that. And I'm guessing that at some point, or at this point, maybe people that are watching or listening they're thinking, I don't know what my child's future holds.
Yeah. And I was thinking that too.
Yeah. And we won't know.
Yeah.
No, we don't. And again, I'll go back to what I said earlier, that as a parent, all I knew is that I just didn't want to have any regrets. And I still, I have little regrets, I'm sure, along the way. I just don't focus on them. But I do know at the very core of what I've done as a parent is I've just continued to focus on my child's future. And I could have never, ever had imagined, nor do I think any of the professionals that knew my kids when they were, 3 and 5, I could have never have imagined that they would be where they are today. It's just mind-blowing.
Well, none of us has a crystal ball.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing we can know for sure is that if we don't have a path, I love your slide with the varying paths. One thing that we can know for sure is that if we haven't thought about the path, there's no telling where we're going to end up, right? We love to go hiking. And if we don't think about staying on the path we're supposed to be on, we can end up in some crazy places, Lisa. So having that vision is really helpful. And I think it depends on the family and the individual, but how far ahead they want their vision to be, but it needs to be there. And also it prevents us from going into management mode. We're just managing every day. with no vision.
That's a really good point. And I can also tell you that in my experience, it's the most difficult for families to think about the long-term perspective and how far ahead they're able to think when they're in crisis or when they're grieving. And so hopefully the listeners will have had a chance to listen to um, Dr. Sarah Whalen's presentation, because I think that that will be most helpful for people. But yes, I think it is hard sometimes to go there. But I like to think about knowledge as power. Sometimes it's a little bit scary, but when you can put yourself in the position of learning the facts and learning the research, then hopefully that will help you make your decisions. And it's difficult because there's a lot of information out there. Which way, in terms of which way to go, there's an awful lot of options, and I think that it can be overwhelming for families. But if you understand the research, I think that it can be really, really almost cut and dry, actually. It can be really, really helpful.
I think so too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of the things that
I noticed here that.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I just noticed here that you said to make sure you catch Dr. Gustein's presentation. And I think knowing the latest research is what you said, it's empowering. Knowing it is a part of the empowerment for us as parents. And how many times have we heard, and I can say this, you having older children as well, but with the 23-year-old, well, what does the research say? We as parents get actually asked that, particularly when we state some of our visions, right? Yeah. So I think you're so right. It's key to thinking about a vision for our child.
And it is quite interesting to me, having been there, done that. As a parent, I did what was most recommended to us, and yet it didn't address those core deficits in my child at that time. He had developed all the skills that his same age peers had developed, but yet he was no less autistic. And I still had a lot of fear for his future. And it was actually in 2003 when I saw Dr. Gutstein way back then. He came to Toronto during the SARS epidemic, and I remember just thinking that he was such a courageous man because the World Health Organization said Toronto was unfit for travel. But he came, and I was really thankful. And he actually shared this one of the things I'm going to share with you in a few minutes, which is the Employability Skills 2000, which was done by the Conference Board of Canada. But he really helped me understand what autism was in a way that totally resonated with me, completely made sense. Up until that time, my experience was if we could just extinguish the behaviors that look like autism and reinforce those behaviors that look like typical development, that our child would be okay. And that was not the case at all. In fact, I can remember at one time, and this might sound really awful, I hope they don't still do this today, but the therapist would wear clickers, and he was expected to respond within a 2 to 3 second window, and if he didn't, then he didn't get his reinforcement, and he didn't get the click. And so, for the data purposes, and it just, anyway, I could tell you lots of stories, but I realized when I started to modify the way that I was communicating with my son that I too had become a thinking robber, and I started to give him space and time and communicate with him in ways that would help facilitate his own thinking. And it was a beautiful thing to see unfold. It really was. Yeah. So let's go on. I'm going to talk with you a little bit about the universal impairments of persons with autism, and this is the latest research that's just come out in the last 10 years, but even more specifically in the last 6. And again, that's something Dr. Gutstein will share those articles with you. He's done a wonderful synopsis of all of the research, and he's put in thousands of hours of review of that. I don't think there's anybody else in the world that has done what he's done.
Mm-hmm.
So what the universal impairments of persons with that are on the autism spectrum are things like an impoverished static self. And what that means is that that person's sense of self and their self-awareness is not continuing to grow throughout their lifespan. So that's what that means. And then unable to extract meaning from personal experiences, they are not able to make meaning out of their personal experiences that will provide them with opportunities to learn and to grow and to further understand the world and how they fit in it. They have difficulty with ability to adapt to unpredictable changing circumstances. This I think we all know. They're unable to manage social situations and to solve problems in complex, unpredictable, stress-producing environments. So in more of a static, when this problem happens, then you do this solution. That's not a problem. It's more of that when they're involved in complex situations, that's where it's going to be more difficult. And then unable to conduct. This is something that's going to be a little bit harder for people to understand, but I'm going to try to put it in simple terms. Unable to conduct internal dialogues to consider multiple perspectives. This means an internal dialogue that we have in our heads, and we all do it.
We do.
Consider, on one hand, maybe I could consider or should do it this way, but on the other hand, maybe this is worth taking into account. And that's going to change dramatically based on who you're dealing with, where you're dealing with it, what your circumstances are, the environmental conditions, your internal resources, your external resources. But the ability to have those back and forth kind of hypothetical kind of discussions with yourself are what we really need to do in order to manage in our world today. Unable to re-experience prior experiences or preview potential future situations. And I'll try to put this in simple terms. This basically means the inability to use hindsight by reflecting on things that have happened to us in the past. And then when you reflect on those things that have happened in the past, being able to think about the future or anticipate future possible situations. We need to be able to do both of those to help us plan and prepare and to make decisions in the moment. We all do it every day. Go ahead.
We do. We all do all of this every day, but we don't really think about it. Well, sometimes we think about it, but we don't think about it like this, right? I was actually cracking up because in the internal dialogues, I sometimes have those out loud to myself. Maybe I could do this with effort. Then I realize I'm talking to myself. But it's our way of all of this is our way of managing ourselves in the world, and even having a deficit in one of these is huge. That's what really struck me as you were going through this list.
It is huge. And what children do is they start to be able to extract meaning from personal experiences, but they can't quite make it out. And then they go over here and they're able to appreciate and understand and value others' thoughts and feelings. So my son may go to school and he may be able to know that, oh, this is a really meaningful experience that I need to kind of process. And I'm not able to quite fully process it on my own, but I can feel like there's some kind of conflict going on in terms of, how I should really encode this. And so, and how is it going to help me function more effectively in the future? Because then I'm going to be able to adapt better to ever-changing, unpredictable situations and learn and grow. But anyway, I'm going to come home and I'm going to talk to my mom about it, or my dad, because they're going to help me process it. And that's what typical kids do.
Yeah.
Did that sound like it made sense?
Yes, it does make sense, and particularly when you just turn it around and think about one's own life and how we do these things, you can almost immediately think of an example in one's own life of how this whole process took place. Mm-hmm. And how meaningful it was in your life, but what it would have been like if you couldn't have done it. What would that have done? I always feel that that's so important because it's a real key to the window of why the children struggle. Mm-hmm. A lot of people think that they do things for no rhyme or reason, but if you're an impoverished static self, I mean, imagine what that means to you. You don't want to be an impoverished static self. And that's what I love, too, about Dr. Gutstein and his whole way of thinking is that he emphasizes that the children don't want to be that impoverished static self. It's a product of what the impairment of what's happened to them.
Right. And as humans, we are wired to want to grow continuously throughout our lives. It's innate inside us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the biggest mistake we can make to think that children don't want the rich life. Mm-hmm. It's these impairments that keep them from being able to have it.
And Dr. Gutstein will talk a little bit more about that as well in terms of what the vulnerabilities are that actually lead to the autism and why they do choose to create that static system, that repetitive, safe place, and not. They like to create a predictable environment. Okay, but he'll discuss that more, and I would like to get into all of that, but I'm just a little bit limited in terms of how much I can cover. So, what's important to understand about development when we understand autism? That's really important, but it's also equally important to understand neurotypical development. And what's really important about individuals, NT means neurotypical. What's really important about them is that they have a guiding relationship with their parents, with their grandparents, with as they grow with a more experienced guide. It could be a teacher, as they grow older, but initially it happens with the parent, and it happens in every culture throughout history in neurotypical development. It's the basic fundamental relationship that parents and children develop naturally, where the child learns from their more experienced parent, and the child becomes motivated to learn from their parent, to apprentice to the parent. And through that relationship, the children begin to develop a sense of who they are and how they fit into the world. And so it's quite interesting that it's through the guiding relationship, not only do they develop social competency, but they also develop self-competency or greater self-awareness. And so for whatever reason, autism really prevents this relationship from developing naturally. Okay. And so it's important to understand autism and that it does prevent the guiding relationship from naturally occurring. I've heard so many times from parents that they just want to be able to engage with their child, or they don't know how to play with their child, or they're just not quite sure to provide their child with what they need. And that's because that back and forth reciprocal relationship and that motivation for the child to want to learn from the parent and the parent's ability to get reliable feedback from the child has been thwarted. It's been interrupted or severed. And so it's important to know when it is developed, and this is what I help, and I know that you help, Kat, this is what we help reestablish with families when we're guiding them. What occurs, what evolves, is a rich, evolving dynamic self. The child learns how to effectively and extract and apply meaning from personal experiences. They learn how to adapt to unpredictable situations. They become socially competent, flexible thinkers, problem solvers. In dynamic situations, they do start to develop that internal dialogue. They're able to use reflection and prospection, or review of the prior experiences, anticipating future scenarios. We can also call it mental time travel. But I like to again say the ability to look at the past, anticipate the future in order to make good decisions in the moment. And they appreciate other people's thoughts and feelings. Not only do they appreciate them, but they understand They seek them. One of my favorite quotes, I believe, was from Dr. Peter Hobson, and it was, what does it matter what we know unless we can pass it through the minds of another person so that we can broaden our perspective.
I love how it talks about a rich dynamic self, and as you're talking about the vision forward, that kind of encapsulates what I think we all want for our children. I mean, the word rich and dynamic self, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful picture.
Thank you. Well, it's a very, very, very dynamic world that we live in, and I'm continually a little bit amazed at not just how children with autism struggle to manage, but everybody.
Yeah, indeed.
Because technology has evolved so much, but our human brains have not kept up.
Exactly.
Yes, evolution, we've not kept up. But anyway, let's take a look at the Employability Skills 2000, and this was, again, something that Dr. Gutstein had exposed me to back in 2003, and I remember thinking, no, the Conference Board of Canada, and they're not the only people that ever came up with a survey like this. There's other ones I actually just came across the other day, and I don't even think it was on purpose, but the Conference Board of Canada 2000 plus did a survey, and this is what employers are looking for. They're looking for their employees to be good communicators, to be able to manage information, to think and solve problems, to be adaptable, to learn continuously, and to have good collaboration or teamwork skills. And so we're going to break these down a little bit. The top portion of these slides talks specifically about what the Conference Board of Canada says, which is they want people to be able to write and speak so others understand. They want their employees to be able to listen and ask questions to understand the points of views of others, so perspective taking. And they want people to be able to ensure that communication and comprehension exists. And so with autism, what we know is that they have difficulty with taking on or appreciating other people's perspectives. That's what the research tells us. They have difficulty managing social situations, and their ability to learn from their experiences is quite limited. And so when we're having those difficult conversations, we can learn from them and figure out a better way to maybe communicate the next time. I was having a conversation with a mom the other day, and she was telling me that she had learned in her work environment that if she needed to ask a coworker a favor, she found that it was never good to do it on a Monday.
Oh,
it was better to do it on a Friday.
That's good.
So when we're thinking about the big picture and what really matters in terms of helping somebody achieve the good communication skills, it's not like my son who was taught to speak in 8 and 9 word sentences which were appropriate for 5-year-olds, but he was no more able to have reciprocal back and forth conversations. He wasn't able to take responsibility to make sure that communication comprehension occurred. So building developmental steps necessary to build communication competency, and that could even, children or parents are so they're so wanting their child to develop the ability to speak, but we have to understand that long before children learn how to speak, they learn how to communicate, and they learn how to interpret nonverbal communication, and they understand the nuances of that back and forth kind of relationship, and that happens long before speech. So we need to really take that into account when we're thinking about the goals that we have for our kids. The ability to develop appreciation for perspective taking and comparing and contrasting our perspectives about the world. And then understanding that managing unpredictability, which is inherent within communication. Communication requires that someone take responsibility for knowing that it's a two-way street. Communication is a back and forth process. If I'm going to communicate something to you, I need to continually monitor you to make sure that what I'm sharing has been understood. And even that you have some level of enthusiasm for what it is that I'm trying to say. And I do that by monitoring your nonverbal communication. As a listener, I need to make sure that what I understand is indeed what you intended to communicate. And so one of my favorite quotes that I use regularly in my household is, the greatest illusion in communication is that it's been achieved. And I always tease my husband whenever we have one of those breakdown moments, which happens.
Well, that reminded me of one of the things we say in our house, and I cannot remember which movie it's from. You may remember, but I'll say what we have here is a failure to communicate.
Yes,
I
yes,
say that often.
yes.
It is amusing to them, but it's a big deal.
It is. Communication is highly underrated, and when you understand that it's highly fragile, then you don't get upset if it breaks down, and you expect that it will break down. And so then you know that you have to continually monitor. And that's another thing that we actually teach our parents and our children to come to understand. And it's very empowering, and it really helps them become much better communicators. Manage information is another one that the employers are looking for from their employees. And so this is a little bit, I put it into context of autism, but they're looking for employees that can locate, gather, and organize information and apply the knowledge and skills from different disciplines. And so what we know about individuals with autism is that they're easily overwhelmed with information, that they have difficulty distinguishing important from unimportant details. So the ability to dynamically appraise what's most important at any given time is going to change. And so this can relate back to meaning making from personal experiences. And then the ability to, their inability to access mental time travel or to be able to use those prior prior experiences or preview potential future scenarios to learn from their experiences and to build knowledge. So that knowledge that individuals can build is going to help them figure out what's most important to pay attention to at any given one time, what's most relevant. It's going to help them know where they should focus their attention based on the context, based on the situation, based on the person, that they're dealing with. In some cases, that's a very dynamic process that a lot of individuals with autism can really get hung up on. Mm. So what really matters with respect to being able to manage information is thinking developmentally about how children learn. And initially they learn how to appraise their world through their experiences with their parents. The parents learn how to carefully spotlight what's most important to pay attention to at any given time. They're able to spotlight what's central versus what's peripheral. And the child learns how to borrow the parent's perspective and develop that dynamic appraisal themselves. Eventually, the parent will transfer that over to them. They're able to use experiences in a way that will help them function more effectively in the future. So they're learning how to save their experiences and use those prior experiences that are meaningful and potentially useful for the future.
That's really beautiful. And I think that so key in there, we're talking about a vision for our children, is that all children go through this time of taking their parents' perspective and figuring out how it applies. But children with ASD, they're not doing that. It's one of the beauties of Dr. Gutstein's work. And even in the very most foundations of the work, when you're with a new child, you're figuring out where are they in that process, or have they even started on that process? Are they just completely not there? But the title is appropriately so. What really matters? It's very beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Yes, it is quite interesting. I have a brand new parent on my caseload and still trying to figure out a few things with the child, but I know mom's doing a really good job trying to slow down and share just her thoughts, and he's not able to yet appreciate or value her perspective, and so he's misinterpreting her self-talk as kind of as an instruction about what they're going to do, and she's just actually being a little bit more reflective. And so it is sometimes the children just aren't ready yet, but developmentally speaking, we will modify the program and adjust the way that we're communicating to help support the child until they are ready, and we'll take it step by step to help them get there. And so with the child's ability to be able to learn from their experiences, what that means really simply, again, is that they're not making the same mistakes over and over, and that they're developing a greater understanding of the world and themselves and how everything fits together. And so the other thing that the individuals do, and it's very dynamic, is they're learning how to make connections or categorize experiences so that they can access them in a very dynamic manner. So it's not just when I go to so-and-so's house, I know that I have to behave such and such way. It becomes a process of where they're able to make connections between similar but not exactly the same situation or setting. Fascinating to think about how individuals with autism actually don't naturally do this. They don't. It's hard to fathom in a way. And this is one of the reasons why social scripts can fall very short when you consider how they're used or accessed. And it's usually just in that very specific manner. They're not able to use them in a dynamic way. I remember my son's senior therapist had joined us for the weekend with her family to go camping. And the husband had approached my son, and this was prior to RDI, but he had approached my son and he said, "Hey, Evan, what's up?" And my son did this.
Yeah.
And I thought, he doesn't have social competency, he doesn't have communication competency within the context of what's gone on. I would have liked to have thought that he would have understood that that was a greeting. But he had understood that when people approached or when you said hello to somebody, it was hi. My name's Evan. How are you?
Right.
So another thing that I think is really powerful is, to even make the distinction between what's the difference between information and what's the difference between knowledge. Well, it's information plus experiences equals knowledge. And so it's so important to understand why real world meaningful experiences are the things that really give us the knowledge that we need in life to be able to manage, to be able to learn, to be able to grow from. If we don't have those authentic, meaningful experiences, they just don't get encoded in our brain.
This is one of those concepts that actually, once I understood it, I mold it for some period of time. What is knowledge? What is information? What is experience? And what do they mean to each other? And some of these things, when you go think about them through your week, become very impactful to how they shape our lives. It changed my whole view of what knowledge was, by the way.
Yes, and I think knowledge is one of those things that really needs to be experienced. You could have somebody come fresh out of school and they could have all the information in the world, but without that experience, they may not really possess the knowledge that they need to have in order to be able to help you. Experts have knowledge.
Yes, indeed.
Okay. So the other areas are thinking and problem solving. So being able to creatively explore possible solutions to problems, seeking different points of view, being able to explore the solution and see if it works and improve on it if it doesn't, and then just recognizing the dimensions of a problem that recognizing the human, the interpersonal, the technical, the scientific, all the different dimensions that can affect a problem. And with autism, rote learning is a strength typically, but the creative problem solving in novel situations can be challenging. Exploring options to find a best fit solution is difficult. One solution does not work for all problems. And the inability to develop that internal dialogue to consider multiple perspectives is also difficult. I know when I'm trying to guide families to think about problem solving, one of the things that I really want them to do is recognize that it's not about getting the problem right. It's about the process of slowing down and considering multiple options before you take action. So that's what I really want to help them develop the habit to routinely slow down to consider possible options. So we can call that exploring. And then also experimenting can fit with that last point there, where you're continually monitoring and updating your knowledge. It's critical to the process of problem solving, because you may come up with an idea, but then you need to test it out and see if it fits or if it works. And it may not, it may be the best fit in this situation on this day with this person, but it may not be, next week with,
Indeed.
with different situation.
Different people.
Different people, different resources, all kinds of things. And so we need to be able to recognize that best fit solutions can change, based on those situations, those resources. Okay, so being able to be, we're going to move on, being adaptable, being able to work independently or as part of a team. I know so often parents might think, well, my child's really, really good at computers, and so forth. Therefore, we'll just focus all their efforts on working in their preferred interest of computers. But even still, they need to be able to work collaboratively as a team and also be able to communicate effectively. They need to be able to carry out multiple tasks or projects. Their roles could change. They need to be open to change and to the ideas of others, to be able to accept feedback and learn from their mistakes and to cope with uncertainty. And so individuals with autism are highly stressed with change, novelty, and uncertainty. And so, again, this is what the research tells us. They have difficulty collaborating on a team because it actually creates more uncertainty. You don't know what that other person's going to come up with, and then you've got to be able to adapt to that. Mm-hmm. And then they're unable to use the prior experiences and anticipate the future scenarios, and they have a preference for sameness. And so what really matters is learning how to develop flexible thinking, to appreciate novelty and incongruity. As people, once we master something, we generally want to move on because, we want to grow and we like a little bit of novelty and incongruity. We're able to appreciate others' perspectives as opportunities for growth, and we accept that change and uncertainty are to be expected, and in fact, they're the spice of life. So, in order to develop a growth-seeking mindset, so that we want to learn, we have to be able to grow and adapt to an ever-changing needs of the 21st century. We already talked about that in terms of today's demand on us. And we need to be able to develop competency as it relates to cusp situations, and this is a term that Dr. Gutstein is coined, which means complex, unpredictable, stress-producing environments. And that's the 21st century, that's what we live in. And so moving on, the other area that employers are looking for is for a child to learn continuously. And I could also say that this would be growth-seeking mindset. So being able to assess personal strengths and area for development, how can I learn to grow? My son, he was a chubby kid, and he got to the point where, he was just tired of being chubby, and I think he started to he started to like girls. And so he decided that, maybe girls were more important than food. And mind you, he still eats, but, he chooses much more wisely. Yes. And so that was an area for development for him. Being able to set goals, to evaluate progress, to be resilient in the face of those challenges, to plan for and achieve learning goals, to identify learning opportunities. And so individuals with autism often have difficulties with their self-awareness. They have a weak ability to learn from prior experiences. History of failure results in low motivation and feelings of incompetence. And they will avoid uncertainty, which results in limited growth. And I think so often what happens, unfortunately, sometimes is that there's a lot of overcompensation that can occur from parents or from school staff for the individuals with autism, and it can actually inhibit or it can interfere with the growth of our children.
Absolutely.
So what really matters is to learn how to promote that growth-seeking mindset and to develop the ability to think reflectively and to think, and I've mentioned that a lot. Being able to evaluate goals and progress evaluation. So being able to continually monitor, I've got a goal, I've set it, and now I need to respect the fact that it's going to take practice and it's going to take time, but I got to continually monitor my efforts to see how they're working for me. And then also being able to develop the dynamic self through real-world, authentic, meaningful experiences, which I've talked about, is how important that is. And then mastering motivation and goal setting. So teamwork skills is the final one that I'll be discussing, and that's being able to work in a group, be flexible to others' ideas,
Wow.
to participate in planning and carrying out projects. And then with autism, it's quite difficult for an individual with autism to be able to coordinate their actions and emotions. You know, are we on the same page? Do we feel the same way about something? Interpreting that nonverbal communication, appreciating other people's thoughts and perspectives, being flexible and being able to adapt with the group if they go in a direction differently than what you were thinking. And then what really matters is being able to get on the same page, to be motivated. This is a biggie. You could try to teach somebody about the skills to be able to communicate or have a conversation, but you can't force that motivation.
No.
That motivation is bred through competency, which is just so critical. When we're collaborating with others, we need to be able to continually, I see a little typo, but we need to be able to continually monitor others and are we connecting? Are we on the same path? Being able to appreciate others' perspectives, to broaden our perspective, accept others' ideas, in general, developing social competency and problem solving, because you've got to be able to monitor or recognize when a breakdown happens, and then make, or a little misstep, if you will, and then make a slight modification to adapt. These things are just a natural part of what we do. It's the dance, if you will, of social connection. Okay.
You said it several times throughout this presentation, but that part of what we do with guides is slow down so that the children can experience repairing. They can experience that whole processing that goes on, rather than expect this all to take place in a couple of seconds. It's such an important principle, and it's really the only way to get it. These things can't just happen in an instant.
We're developing new pathways in the brain. Neuroplasticity is occurring, and that takes time, and it's a process. But by educating the parents to understand what it is that's really preventing the child's growth, then they can become the agents of change. And it's the most empowering, wonderful thing to be able to witness professionally and as well personally, to be able to have lived that. It's really profound. And so to wrap up this presentation, I ask parents to think about what the program goals are that they're currently working on with their children or their child, and will those or do those goals equate to real world functioning? Will they help improve quality of life? Do they support any of the above mentioned abilities? And how important are those goals in the big scheme of life, or the big scheme of things? I remember talking with a mom, and I don't mean to judge, but I felt like my heart kind of crack a little bit. I was talking to a mom, and her son came up to her in the midst of a conversation, and he asked her to open up a jar for him, a jar of pickles. And she began to drill him, and she said, "Are they dead or alive?" She would not open up that jar of pickles until he told her the right answer as to whether or not that pickle was dead or alive. I remember that must have been one of her program goals.
I don't know. Is it a trick question?
Yeah. Like at one time it was alive, and now it's dead.
No, but we understand as parents, because I can think of some really strangenesses that I hate to call it a strangeness. I don't mean strange in the sense that she was strange, but some of the odd questions that can be asked. Outside of a game, I can't see why that question would be asked, but I know what the goal was, as you do as a parent. And oh, yeah, we can only feel for her,
Mm-hmm.
actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, I'm not trying to judge her, and I just assume that it must have been one of their program goals, and
Yeah.
she was just probably trying to integrate it into everyday life and make it more meaningful. And but at the end, but at the end of the, at the end of the day, I thought to myself, who cares? Who cares if it's dead or alive? And anyway, so are the goals developmentally sound? That's
Mhm.
also important. I know often I see children who could be, 11 or 16 or 18 or 23. And it's important to be able to look at them developmentally, and if they're missing some of those foundations that are developed at 1 year or 2 years of age, we need to go back there, not in a baby way, but
Mm-mm.
in a way that will make sense for them and respect who they are, in their chronological age, but at the same time help to build those foundations. Because if you don't, and you're building stuff above it, if this isn't here and it's not solid, you know, this is just going to crumble. And so again, finally, are these goals going to help your child learn how to connect and relate to other people? Because one of the things that I will never forget is I had seen Dr. Norman Deutsch, and he's the big author of The Brain That Changed Itself. And one of I think, the people that's really helping us all understand neuroplasticity. And it really does give hope. But the very first thing that he said in this 2-day workshop that I saw him speak at was that the mind develops as a result of our relationships and our experiences. And so we need to think about what we're exposing our children to. And we also need to really appreciate that as parents, we have a really, we make the most sense to be able to really help support our children's mind development. Okay. And so I hope that this presentation helps to give you the big picture about some of the things that you can think about. And, some kids may never develop complete independence, but we don't know if we don't keep trying. And I can tell you that even those kids that don't develop complete independence, they still develop um, in a way that their parents know that their quality of life is much better than would have been otherwise, and they have that relationship with their child, and they have a deeper connection, and their child is able to manage much better than they would have otherwise had they not worked on really developing these innate desires that are all in us. And so every child has beautiful gifts inside them. And as I said earlier, I doubt that any professional that would have known my children way back when would have ever have even imagined that they would be where they are today.
Well, I would say for parents who have been told that the brain is a hard-boiled egg, and by first or second grade, it's done. Uh, Toss that idea and realize that the brain continues to change, and you can build your child's mind.
Right. So finally, I have a little bit of a little offer to share with families, and one of the free offers that is going to be provided for the participants of this summit is a free version of the Kindle, a free Kindle version of the RDI book. And so we're going to begin a book study, an online book study. It'll be free, and it'll be starting on March the 8th. So you can actually go to my website, www.mindfulguideconsulting, and you can register. Please do that by February the 19th, and that will run every 2 weeks. And then as well, and again, some of you may be thinking, I don't know where my child's at developmentally or what this even means to them. I'm offering a 1-month subscription to our online RDI operating system, which is filled with resources and a plethora of developmentally appropriate goals for parents and for children. And I will also do a 30-minute video assessment of the child, and I will do that either online or in person, and I will provide initial developmental goals specifically to the child. This is limited to just 5 families, and they must register by February 19th, and there is a discount for that.
Fabulous. Very exciting.
Thank you.
Lisa, thank you so much. You've given us all so much to think about for our children and such a hopeful message. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Kat. Thank you. We'll see you soon.